Clearly, this is a series on wellness and trauma and learning how to recognize trauma and learning what is trauma. I'm not a big fan of the word trauma because you think of trauma, it's like trauma. And sometimes it is trauma. But oftentimes, it's much more subtle than that. What I'm going to do is broaden, hopefully, what that means for people and allow access to heal from trauma, if that is what somebody's experiencing. Buffalo Creek, West Virginia, February 26, 1972, had one of the biggest floods this nation's ever seen when a mining accident happened and a faulty mining dam broke. And about 100 feet of water, which was filled with mining debris, went through a town similar to this town and caused a lot of damage. And, you know, extensive damage. And what a year later, a sociologist came in and did an oral history and a sociological study of the town after the flood. And what I want to do is I'm going to read a quote from what one woman said from that flood. This was a year afterwards. She said, "Well, I've got a nervous condition due to the flood. I'm tense. I lose my temper easily. I have bouts of depression every now and then, and I can't stand loud noises. They tear my nerves all to pieces. It seems like I've lost all confidence in myself, and I'm afraid to be alone. I'm afraid of storms. I have nightmares. I'm just not the same person I was before. When I have these bouts of depression, everything seems dark. I feel like there's nothing to live for. It's a terrible low." This easily could be somebody who saw the flood from afar. It could be somebody who was in the flood. It could be somebody who was a relative of the flood. It could be somebody who saw the flood on television. What this narrative that I just read illustrates is how powerful these responses can be. So the question then is, what is trauma? Let's see what other people have to say about this. If you looked in the dictionary, it's a psychological or emotional injury caused by a deeply disturbing experience. I'm not really satisfied with that definition. Another definition, trauma originates as a response in the nervous system, not in the event. Now this is probably not trauma exactly, but a characteristic of trauma. And this is more of the perspective that we're going to start taking from. Judith Herman, who's a very well-known trauma therapist, says, "Traumatic events are extraordinary, not because they occur rarely, but rather because they overwhelm the ordinary human adaptations to life. The common denominator of trauma is a feeling of intense fear, helplessness, loss of control, and threat of annihilation." Okay, I think that's pretty accurate to some degree, but we're going to make it even broader. Now, I'm going to put this definition in here too, because what a lot of you might have heard of trauma is a thing called PTSD. Everybody heard of that before, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. We hear a lot about post-traumatic stress from the soldiers coming back from different wars. Pretty much every soldier who's seen combat has post-traumatic stress symptoms. There's a lot of press about post-traumatic stress. And the DSM-4, those little initials up there, is what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health. What they say is a person has been exposed to a traumatic event in which both the following were present. The person experienced, witnessed, or was confronted with an event or events that involved actual threatened death or serious injury, or a threat to the physical integrity of self and other. The person's response involved intense fear, helplessness, or horror. Now, the twist I want to put on this, and this is what's really relevant to dealing with stuff like a flood and other kinds of trauma, is that what somebody perceives as a threat to one's survival can be completely different depending on the person. Somebody stepping very aggressively forward could be a threat to somebody's survival. Another person might have the same reaction in a car accident. So I thought I'd put some of the short list of the types of trauma. Natural disasters, obviously. Assault of any kind. Car accidents, surgery, war, falls. Developmental. Developmental means, for all intents and purposes, abusive childhood. Some of the signs of trauma, of many, 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 many signs, can be increased irritability, arguments and family discord, clinging, acting out, regressive behavior by children, stomach aches, hunger, lack of hunger, diarrhea, constipation, increased heart rate, erectile dysfunction, lack of libido, increased libido, anxiety, panic, depression, substance abuse, and then I put in survival guilt in there too. But what I want to point to is that, and this is the most, perhaps if you take away anything from this lecture today, this is the most important part, is this sentence right here, that trauma is physiological. It means it's in the body. It's not psychological. Trauma is a response to something that has happened. An event unto itself is not traumatic. We have a traumatic response to an event. Trauma is not a mental illness. This is really important. What we're talking about doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's a physiological reaction that needs to move through you. So what's going on in the body with trauma? Why can we react this way? We want to survive. What we're talking about is the basic building blocks of what makes us be alive in the world. So there's 3 survival responses. So the first one is fight, right? Rah, right? The bear. What happens when you fight? Like I just said, your hearing starts to go. You ever in a movie, or you've ever been in a thing where things feel like they're slowing down, or like somebody's going, oh, right? That's what it feels like when you're in a fight reaction. And all you can see is what's right in front of you. But the same thing, when you're fleeing, you lose your hunger, your saliva retracts into your mouth, you don't need to drink anything. Your legs start feeling like they want to run. Some of you might feel that when you think of somebody that is unpleasant to you too. You might start feeling tingling in your legs. That's your body's way of saying, okay. And then the last was the freeze response, right? The freeze immobility. How many people here has ever been in a, like, standing on the curb or in almost gotten hit by like a bus or a car? Anybody who's lived in the city, right? Anybody remember that? What happens when that happens? Are you just totally fine right after that? Usually not. It's like the charge. Your body mobilizes for that. And if you don't let it out, it stays in there. That's the simplest way to think about it. So what happens is that generally, if something like that happens that really creates one of these responses, usually you start feeling yourself shaking a little bit, right? And one of the biggest mistakes that emergency workers make is they stop people from shaking. What happens if you can't fight and you can't flee? What happens? You freeze. And a freeze response can be very dangerous in our system. And I'm skimming on the surface of a flood because with natural disasters, there's a lot going on. And with a flood, what we often find ourselves in is in a freeze. Because you can't fight the roaring water. You can't fight your house going down. You can't run away. There's nothing. It's called an immobility response. And immobility will shut down your gut. It'll decrease your heart rate. You'll see people's affect as you walk through the community. You can see people's face will drop. You can see that's one of the signs too. What needs to happen is that the freeze needs to be expressed somehow. Trauma is part of the human experience. Everybody can understand this. But what most people forget is that healing from trauma is also part of the experience too. Know your resources. What is a resource? One of the best ways to think about this trauma stuff is think about it like a vortex, right? So you have a vortex. Okay? It's almost like a moving up in your body usually is what it feels like. And you just keep coming back to it again and again and again. That's when you start going to your doctor and you're like, wow, I don't know why I have a headache all the time. Or like, wow, I've just, I've lost my appetite. Or wow, I've gained so much weight. Or wow, my blood pressure's been running really high lately, right? So resources are the counter vortex. And what we want to do is we want to link these together, right? We want to link these resources together with the trauma vortex. And so what I'm going to talk about is how do you create one of these? Because without this, they kind of neutralize each other. It doesn't deny that you're having these feelings or this experience. People tend to minimize this. Like, oh, you're just feeling nervous. Or you'll get over it. Just let it go. If you could, who wouldn't want to let go of this? This would be great. But the fact of the matter is you can't just let it go. You can't be like, okay, gone. It doesn't work that way. This is physiological, not psychological. Synagogues, parishes, places of worship are a great source of community. To have a sense in your body what that feels like to be supported is helpful. And to bring it one more step down into your body, if you do have those resources, just to take a moment and let your body recognize that that's where you are and that you're supported in that community or whatever community it is. Spiritual practices can be helpful. Community support groups, friends, relatives, clubs, organizations, to know that you're craving support and to use that. And to recognize that, not as a weakness, but as something that's part of you, that we need resources. This is us. Like, it's not just this. This is also felt in the body, but we have a lot more control over this aspect of it. The arts, imagination are wonderful ways to express yourself. Writing, singing, dancing. Other expressive arts are great. Using your imagination. Like, for instance, this is why one of the reasons I love working with kids, because they don't have the same ideas that adults have about like how you should be. So you can work with a kid who's had a house that's been flooded, and we're drawing houses that have wings on them. The key is that use your imagination and linking it into as a counter vortex to feel it in your body. Rest is important. Play. A lot of adults just forgot, like, wait a minute, what happened to play in this? Exercise, really important. Touch, keeping your body going, in touch with your body. These are all things. Nature. We live in the Catskills. Go for a walk. So when things get complicated, a lot of us have experienced multiple losses. In a flood, it can be really hard. You lose your house, lose a sense of security, a sense of safety, a basic assumption that we all have that we're safe. But not everybody has that as a basic assumption. There's a lot of people who the basic assumption is not that you are safe. What about the kids? Because it's a little bit different with kids. Being a traumatized child, parenting a traumatized child, teaching a traumatized child. The inevitable question, when do you seek professional help? I think that's a subjective question. If you're finding yourself feeling like a different person, you're finding yourself not able to live the way you feel like you should or can, you might want to think about that. If you start feeling like you don't want to live, it's also another time to start thinking about that. I probably highly recommend it if you're having those feelings. One last thing on this very skimming the surface of trauma here. It's called the coupling phenomenon. I'm going to give a very mild example. When I was a kid, I got really sick. Like, I got a stomach bug. And right before I got sick, I had a fudgesicle at a Good Humor truck. So for years afterwards, just even thinking of a fudgesicle would make me feel nauseous, right? So one thing unrelated to another thing together, right? So I couldn't separate in my body the difference between a fudgesicle and feeling sick. With flooding and natural disasters, one of the things that people find helpful to hear about, and I think it makes a lot of sense when you kind of feel this, is that everybody knows people who are doing this, is that when something like this happens, we want to couple everything. So I'm just using a car accident. Somebody was in a ski accident in the winter. It was a really bad one. They've been working on that. They thought they'd let it go. The flood happens, they start thinking about that ski accident again and again and again, right? So things start getting bound together, right? That car accident you had, bound together. That stuff that happened when you were 15. Ooh, comes back in. It just comes right to the surface. Does everybody have a sense of what I'm talking about with this? Right? We want to, like, two supposedly separate things start coming together, right? It can even be increased heart rate because of our threat response, right? Reminds us when we, lost a race when we were doing track in high school and were humiliated. So you start having a sense of humiliation walking around. I mean, it can be anything. That's what it never ceases to surprise me what we can do to couple things together. So just be really aware of that. And the best way, and this is what I want to end on, is a resourceful thing that this is one of the it can be for a lot of people, is one of the most helpful phrases to say to yourself. That was then, this is now. The flood was then, this is now. It was unsafe in the flood, and to feel that in your body, and it's safe now. So questions, anything?
How do we help other people?
Great question. Great question. You want to come up and be an example for a second?
Sure.
One of the things that I elected, hoping that somebody would ask this question, is that one of the best things we can do is use touch. And why? Because it can be fundamentally comforting to have somebody get support. Because remember, it's physiological, not psychological. So can I have permission to touch your back and your shoulder? Mm-hmm. You maybe move over here a little bit. Can everybody see? So I want to show you a couple touches that can be really helpful for people. And one of the most important things to do, as all of us are out there, being now newly inducted into trauma helpers, is that one of the things that we want to do is that you always want to ask permission to touch somebody. Asking permission changes it profoundly. A lot of people out there don't like to be touched and won't say that. And they'll just sit there like, right? Don't do that. If you want to be helpful in this way, you have to kind of pay attention, of course, and be mindful of yourself and your body, and to avoid being the helpful tyrant. Like, oh, how can I help you, right? Sometimes, so I can touch your back, and sometimes we can do is just put your hand right here, right on the small of the back here. That's a great place, a lot of nerves back there. And I just want to ask, what does that feel like to have my hand there like that in a supportive way?
Relaxing.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And also, another great touch too, can I touch your shoulder? Is to put your deltoids touch, right? So you put your hands here, right? Mm-hmm. This is not a rubbing, this is not a patting. This is a supportive touch, right?
And it's comforting.
Yeah. And I'm going to put my hand on your other shoulder, okay? She's great. It's like a nice compact model here. Yeah. And everybody can see. So like double here, right? And how's that feel right now?
Fine.
That feels
comfortable.
Yeah? Okay, good. One of the things, the deltoid right here is really good. There's a lot of nerves here, so it can be very comforting. One of the things you want to avoid is that down here. Because remember, what happens to a lot of us when we're kids? How do you get pulled around? Right? The best thing to do when you're supporting somebody is just to pay attention to taking their cues. You don't have to fix anything. You're not going to fix anything. All you're going to do is let their body fix themselves. Another great hold, too, for folks is, and maybe we can turn sideways for a second. It's okay if I touch your head for a second? Is that it's called, it's a very, maybe we should change the name. It's kind of an ugly, the brainstem hold. Yeah. But yeah, yes, the brainstem hold is right here. So we're cupping it, right? You feel that? Yeah, right. So that can be really, really supportive right here like that. And sometimes all it takes is this. If somebody's getting really, sometimes just using touch can be really helpful. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And one more thing about the touch, and the permission aspect is so important, because guess what? If you're going to touch someone and they don't want to be touched and you ask them permission, just that can be healing as touching them. Another thing too, as I was kind of looking at you guys here, grief is part of a natural disaster. I want to kind of separate that out a little bit, because we do feel grief when this stuff happens, and that's normal. We mourn the loss of something that we had, and that feels like grief. And that's just sometimes what happens, that grief and trauma bind, right, in the coupling, and you can't grieve. And so people get stuck. We get stuck in not being able to grieve. Grieving has to happen. The earliest rituals that they found in humans were grieving rituals.
Can any of that touching be done to yourself?
Oh, beautiful question. Wow, I didn't even need to write any presentation here. So yes, in fact, that's a very excellent point. You can do a lot of these touches. Now, I'm not the most flexible, but you can do the deltoid touch on yourself, right? I mean, feel free to invite you to try it and see what it feels like. And you can also, this is a great one, is just to hold the back of your neck here. Hold the brainstem, hold yourself. That's a great one. And remember to invite yourself to feel what does it feel like in your body when you have that held there. Also, you can put your hand on your stomach too. That's a good place. On your belly. And just notice the sensation in your body when you have that hold. You can also do something when somebody's really charged. You can do something called the butterfly hold, which is actually a technique from EMDR, which is a type of trauma therapy. And it's called the butterfly. You can do a tapping. It's supposed to like bilateral stimulation, right, of your head. But this can be a great one. Or just have it like this. It can be soothing, the cross there. And to be gentle with yourself. You know, you don't have to hold hard. So yes, any part of your body that's feeling tense, it can help to just put your hand on yourself gently as a support. Another plug for body workers, good way of helping out if you're feeling like some of this stuff's affecting you is to, a lot of, energy workers and massage therapists and Reiki people, cranial sacral work, that kind of stuff. Acupuncture can be wonderful for this kind of stuff. Acupressure, and sometimes doing some body work with acupuncture, etc., can help a lot. Just know your resources too. I mean, that's this vortex, the counter vortex, is really important. One last question or more?
I just wanted to ask quickly, the people who have been devastated by this hurricane that just happened, how long do you say, I know it's individual with every person, but when would you say that, their rehashing of everything and the constant, going into the depth of what they went through, how long is it before you feel like they needed more help than or is it something that just...
I think it really depends. I think, if somebody's having a reaction, you can't avoid having the reaction. And it can take a while for it to go through you. What the good thing about this community has been really tight. And there's been a lot of community effort, a lot of people volunteering, a lot of people coming together, a lot of rebuilding efforts, and there's been support for people. And that can be a great resource. And I think once people, dealing with the FEMA stuff and like reimbursement and redoing their houses and helping neighbors or whatever's going on, that kind of starts to settle, then people, they're kind of in action mode. And then when that starts settling, then people might start feeling some of this stuff. And that's when you need to start taking care of yourself and others and helping whatever you need to do. And if that's not working, I think generally people tend to, if you're listening to your body, then you'll probably know when you've hit that limit of like, okay, like this isn't working, what I'm doing. I can't seem to escape. If you start feeling like you're in a prison and you're just like, I can't get out, that's probably a good indication. If that's helpful.
I just want to say that you're saying that it was a physiological response, the trauma. So helpful.
Oh, good.
Really, really.
Yeah. Nobody's crazy. Nobody is. We all are. That's probably more accurate. But this stuff is what ends up happening, and this is one of is that things, we want to make something into a thing, into a mental illness. There's something wrong with us. This is not something wrong with us. This is our body surviving. It's doing its job. And it does it well.
I want to thank Thayer, but I just want to really jump off of what Harriet just said here, that you're not crazy. And that's a very normal reaction to stuff that's been happening. You're not crazy. What happened was crazy. And because of that, any reaction you have to it, any response you have to it, is a very normal response. So if you're doing what you would think crazy things, no, you're doing a pretty good job of taking care of yourself to a very crazy situation. Okay, so that's just, I wanted just to comment on that, because that was a great segue into it. I'm Frank Canavan and
Joyce.
Joyce St. George. And we are members of the community, but we have also been retained by Project Hope, which is a community outreach program sponsored by FEMA and run under the auspices of the Office of Mental Health in New York State. We're the actual office that's running the program here in Ulster and Delaware County, the Mental Health Association out of Kingston. And over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks, we will be providing crisis counseling for folks who have been impacted by the storm. Tomorrow is the 60th day of after the hurricane came through, and there are people just now beginning to react to the crisis. Part of the support that we want to be able to provide is this program, this Project Hope program, and it's a series of get-togethers that we'll be giving to the community members, whether it be in forums like this. It'll be educational in nature, that would be. We're also going to be actually knocking on doors with our crisis counselors and providing one-on-one service to members of the community.
One of the things that we can tell you that I think is very important is that the hurricane may have victimized us, but you're here. You survived. And one of the things that's really important to understand is just how well we survived. I mean, I know people who have lost everything. And at the same time, they're still here. So we like to put out that we survived, and luckily, Frank and I were around during the aftermath to help out and just be around. And I never saw spirit like we saw here. So for that, I think this community just needs the biggest applaud that anybody could ever offer it. But that said, and here's the very interesting news. FEMA, in its infinite wisdom, who has been studying this stuff since the 70s, studying hurricanes and traumas and disasters, has come up with this program, this Project Hope, because they understand that everybody's fixing their houses, they're getting their stores back together, we're getting all the material goods back together, but who's focusing on you? And that's what's important right now. Crisis is a moving target. So you could have been fine all the way through these 60 days, but today you got your FEMA notice and you were rejected, right? That, boom, could just drive you right into that state that you were talking about and that we've been talking about, that Thayer's been talking about. So this is kind of like a moving target. We went through the very dramatic, incredible experience of the flood, but now everybody has their own timetable. Will it hit everybody? We don't know. I think we've all been affected, but we don't know how hard and how many it hits. And that's why this Project Hope, based on FEMA's studies, is around to just help people. 90% of us get over with it. We survive, we integrate it, the same way that if we had a cut, eventually it would become a scar. It's just a scar, no big deal. But if you keep picking at it, it can get worse. So Project Hope, as Frank said, is a project that allows several of us to go around knocking on doors, visiting stores, doing community talks, doing all sorts of things so that we could reach everybody who's been affected. If we can just talk for a little while, get your stories out, see how you're doing, give you some resources. If you feel like you need more, we'll come back. If you feel like you need more than that, we've got some phenomenal therapists around here who can help you. It doesn't mean, going back to what Thayer said, that you're crazy. It means this has really hit you. And maybe it's coupling with other things that have hit you. So let's unravel it. Let's get you better. Because we could always rebuild another building, but we can't rebuild you. So all we want to do with Project Hope is try to restore that sense of control, that feeling that we can help ourselves, that feeling that we're good to go again. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you.